today. You are here for Exploring the Metaverse, a dystopian or utopian future. It's going to be an awesome conversation, incredible panelists with me today, and I will briefly introduce them. I'm joined by Alexander Lee, gaming and sports reporter for Digiday, Laura Hertzfeld, my former colleague from a previous life, and also Emmy-winning writer, editor, and producer, and Jane Patel, entrepreneur, psychotherapist, and co-founder of Kabuni Ventures, which I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more about during this session. A couple things before we get started. We'll chat for about a half an hour, this group, and then we will also take questions from the audience. But because it's a webinar, you won't be able to ask them directly. So please put your questions in the chat as we go along, and we will work on taking care of them at the end of the session around a half past or so. Also, in the chat, make sure your setting is to everyone, not to hosts and panelists. If you want to participate in the chat with all of our attendees, you need to check that setting. So do that now, and maybe we'll remind you later also in the chat. So post your questions there, change your settings, tweet about us with the hashtag JSummit. We would love that. And then the last thing I want to say is we are going to be talking about some uncomfortable things too. We will probably have a discussion that brings up harassment, sexual assault in the digital space. So just wanted to let you know that that is going to be part of this content today as we talk about the metaverse. So welcome everyone, and we will get started. So my first question that I would love for all of you to answer is, what is the metaverse? We've been talking about Web3 all day. We've had crypto, DAOs, NFTs, all of that. What is the metaverse, and what is its relationship to Web3? So I'm going to kick that to Alex to start.
Thank you for the intro, Hillary. And yeah, happy to take a stab at this. It's a big question. So I'm going to come out. I have my own opinion on this, and I'd love to be contradicted. When I say metaverse, fundamentally what I'm talking about is a successor state to the internet. It's a new modality of exploring digital spaces that will essentially replace how we use the internet, much like the dawn of social media and mobile computing changed how we use the internet, 10 or 15 years ago. To be more specific, the metaverse is a persistent and immersive three-dimensional virtual environment in which users have persistence of their virtual identity and the virtual assets they own. So what that means fundamentally is, if you are, let's say you are playing a game like Fortnite and you purchase an in-game item that takes the form of a skin you can put over your avatar. The idea of the metaverse is that you will be able to move to another platform with the same identity and items. So let's say Roblox or Decentraland. I should say that to me, there's a pretty significant difference between the metaverse and Web3. They are interrelated but distinct concepts. The metaverse actually describes something closer to game environments, so 3D virtual worlds that people can move around in and socialize with others, much like Fortnite or Roblox. And there's no inherent sort of blockchain or crypto or NFT aspect to this. And then Web3 describes crypto, blockchain, NFT technology that allows people to have ownership of virtual private assets. The reason why these two concepts are increasingly becoming tied together is because NFT technology is the best technology that people have come up with so far to create the persistent assets and persistent identity that would be required to have a true metaverse. One thing that I will also say is that you'll hear a lot of people, and you may have heard people today say that there is no one metaverse. There are multiple metaverses. Roblox and Fortnite and Decentraland are all different metaverses. I completely reject that premise. I think those are different metaverse platforms. If the metaverse is a successor to the internet, then saying there are different metaverses is like saying there are different internets. And I think at this point, we all know that that's not true. What the metaverse is a number of three-dimensional virtual environments that are stitched together in a way that is interoperable and allows you to have a persistence of identity and virtual assets, full stop. So hopefully that did not confuse things any further.
Nino, when you're talking to people, work, patients, your whole world, how do you talk about the metaverse?
Absolutely agree with what Alex says. I think the context of the metaverse is more related to gaming, gets us into a little bit of trouble in the context of how we game currently and in the state of what is offered to us on the market as gaming. How I like to think about the metaverse is thinking about humans will be interacting with other human beings in virtual synthetic environments that are 360 degrees around us, where we're fully immersed, fully present, and fully embodied, engaging with each other around the world with the removal of concepts like time and space and gravity. And, to put it really optimistically, we're dancing with our pixels. We are no longer an observer of the digital interaction, but we are now stepping into it and becoming a first person participant. And that's the big difference here, is that virtual reality as a technology, since its conception, over 30 years ago now, with its military applications, was designed to simulate reality as much as possible. Otherwise, there was no real point in experiencing it for fighter pilots or whatever other kind of military training we were looking at that time. And technologists have been working on, and the fidelity has been increasing such that now, as it's released to us as a commercial viable product, which we're all stepping into now, its intention is to simulate reality. And one of the things that's different in this kind of Web3 context, if we think about it as a physical, our physical world is over here, our digital world was over here with Web1, Web2 brought them together closer. Web3 is going to bring them together and converge them, so that we're now seamlessly, interoperably, one day perhaps traveling through our physical and our digital spaces as one holistic physical and digital person, interoperably between not only digital worlds, but the physical world, biological world as well.
It's fascinating. Laura, as someone who's worked in VR for a long time and really been thinking about this in terms of journalism and news, what's your definition of the metaverse?
Yeah, I would take it, I guess I can't decide if it's a step back or a step forward from what Alex and Nina have been saying, which I definitely agree with, but I think less about this complete 360 VR type gaming experience and more about where we are with the technology we have today, as far as AR, cell phones, web AR, bringing those things that we're very used to now into that next space, and how do those things kind of combine. VR is part of that, but it's not all of that. And then how do those things kind of talk to each other as we move forward? The other piece I think a lot about, it's kind of two things. One is sort of the word metaverse. There's kind of the way that Meta, the company, is defining metaverse. And I think it's gotten really confusing for folks to sort of think about all these different things. So I really try to kind of help define what we know is going on in that space versus all of these other, like Alex is saying, different metaverses that keep kind of popping up, and how do we, start to define what that means for news organizations. And then also what the technological sort of opportunities are for content creation. So thinking about virtual production in the metaverse and tools that we can use, not just about how we interact with content.
Mm-hmm.
And just to quickly riff on what Laura was saying, I do want to acknowledge that the stuff that I was saying, it's a pie in the sky vision. When I talk about the metaverse, I'm talking about something that is not in existence right now. And I think that's actually a question that you had sort of posed just when we were chatting before this is, are we secretly in the metaverse right now without realizing it? I would say definitely not. Right now we are in the Web 2 internet. And then just like last sort of hot take, I agree that what the metaverse is has been totally confused. The fact that Facebook changed its name to Meta does not help with that. Most lay people I talk to just think that metaverse is like a Facebook product or project. I think when what I describe as the metaverse happens, if it happens, we'll just call it the internet. It'll just be an evolution of the way that we use the internet today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to know I'm not secretly in the metaverse right now. That would be disorienting.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think something to consider in the context of the evolution of the internet entering into Web3 / the metaverse is that although we might not be actually in the metaverse right now, we are contributing to how it's being formed and shaped right now. So every digital interaction we have, every search engine or a search word we put into that Google search bar, every social media conversation that we have, every single like that we click on is shaping the future of the metaverse. And that's something we have to consider right now and take it on as a responsibility as part of us as society right now that is generating the future of the metaverse, whatever we call it in the future.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's not going to be like we wake up tomorrow and suddenly you're in the metaverse. Like, we're building it now, and the contributions, particularly that journalists have to make to this space, are really imperative to make it what it's going to be.
It's a great way to move to the next thing I wanted to bring up. So, and there's kind of a lot in here. Nina, it's what you were just saying about how we're all contributing to it now is so interesting, because you're really focused on kids and the metaverse, which is, it's a little bit aside from journalism, but you're encountering things that are really important in terms of news and information as we move into this new space. So that's information, trustworthiness and safety, personal safety. And you've written, and as you noted in our earlier conversation, you've had a couple of headlines about this. I think Yvonne and I came across your experience in The Guardian, if I'm not misremembering, with sort of interacting with a digital, entering a digital space is what a metaverse space, and experiencing assault and aggression and harassment. And so I was hoping you could just share a little bit about that, because I think lots of us haven't even entered these spaces. My kid plays Roblox, she's in there, she does this stuff, but I don't. So can you just tell us a little bit about that? And then I'd love for Laura and Alex to just sort of weigh in on your thoughts about this and journalism, and how maybe we could have a safer space for whatever our interactivity is as we go into the next world.
Yeah, I think I'd like to caveat, the sharing of my story with that my experience is the tip of the iceberg, and is certainly not the only experience of verbal sexual harassment and sexual assault within digital spaces. I think we all know current state of the metaverse, or the internet 2D, is rife with all sorts of harassment, bullying, trolls, you name it, it exists, and it's out of control. And if we choose to interact with it, then it really can take over our lives in the context of especially our children, and the psychological context of what it means to have relationships within the 2D internet. And as I've described, my experience was, I put on a headset, I entered a virtual world that was newly released back in December 2021, and I was checking it out. I've been in many social virtual environments. I've played many VR games. This was not my first time in a social virtual environment, but it was my first time in that particular virtual environment. I was in there for less than 60 seconds. I had 4 male avatars with male voices surround me, relentlessly verbally harassing me, which proceeded very quickly to sexual harassment, which then proceeded very quickly to groping and touching my avatar very inappropriately. And then without me really knowing, they were also doing physical actions that resembled a sexual assault, and with a 4th avatar taking photos and then showing me the photos and saying, this is what you came for. This is what we do here. Welcome to the metaverse. I repeatedly said, stop. I said, why are you doing this? I also kind of physiologically, as we do when something traumatic is happening to us, I froze, and I wasn't able to click those 4 necessary clicks to make, block people and report them. I just couldn't do it. And that's it, as I say, it was not my first time in VR. So I can't even imagine if this was, one of my own children or anybody stepping into a social virtual environment for the first time and thinking that this is what is meant to be happening in this space. And, I shared my story as a personal, exploration on my Medium blog. Part of me wanted to shake it off and ignore it as weirdos on the internet. But because of, knowing the amount of money being invested into the metaverse right now with the trillions that it's being predicted as an economy, we've really got to speak up when when we're seeing this next evolution of the internet starting in such a damaging, traumatic way. It is really concerning, especially in the context, I described it as dancing with your pixels, but of course, in this time, I did not want to be dancing with those pixels. I was fully immersed, I was fully present and fully embodied. And those are techniques that have been particularly designed over 30 years to enhance our brain's ability to believe that the virtual environment is real. It is no accident that this is happening. It's techniques that have been developed. It's science, it's data that's backing this up. And anyways, long story short, I was sexually harassed and assaulted in the metaverse. It hit the headlines. It obviously has piqued some curiosity, and I'm glad. And I continue to advocate for us as a society to speak up. Otherwise, this metaverse is going to be designed with our best interest not in mind, and certainly not the best interest in the long-term psychological well-being of our children.
I was thinking, Laura, I would love to hear your thoughts on this because, and sorry, because we worked around VR and XR and these other experiences that were really, we were trying to bring stories to life to create empathy, but there's this incredible perilous possibility that when we're fully embodied, as Nina's talking about, our work could have, we could have a different experience and others could have a different experience. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first, Nina, thank you for sharing your story. I'm really sorry that happened to you, and really glad that you're working in the space to make it better. I think that's really inspiring and great to hear. I think as far as from a news perspective, it's interesting because a lot of the early VR projects, were, the fear was about traumatizing the person who's going through that experience, right? So there were, solitary confinement pieces. There were a lot of pieces from refugee camps. That was sort of seen as like the most compelling sort of like entry point for a lot of news organizations with this content. And several issues kind of emerged. Like even a lot of those pieces are really powerful, really journalistically sound, but how you find those experiences and then how you're prepared for putting yourself into those experiences were something that we really, learned a lot about. It was less about the well, not less, but it was before you get into the actual experience, it's educating somebody about what they're getting themselves into. So can I remember being at, Sundance and the film festivals, and some of the best pieces that I've ever seen there are ones where you get like an entire experience before you ever put a headset on. So you're really ready to sort of experience whatever that very intense story is. And then the really great ones give you a space to talk about it afterwards and what you went through. And I think we need to start thinking about, when this is kind of everywhere in some of these ways, how do we educate people? How do we have conversations about what's happening there so you don't end up in that kind of situation and then feel totally alone afterwards? Like, oh, I just went through this, and what do I do with that, emotional impact? So it's not impossible to create that empathy. I think it's very possible and really one of the most powerful things that we can do, but we really have to take responsibility for what is the full experience like.
It's interesting too that when you're talking, I'm also hearing about training for journalists, which we don't need to get into here, but we train journalists to go into war situations, into covering things happening here in our own cities, and that the metaverse will likely require a different kind of training, but the same kind of education and awareness about the environment journalists are moving into. Alex, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple thoughts on that. I mean, first of all, Nina, thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm so sorry you went through that. It sounds horrific, and that kind of harassment is definitely nothing new, especially in game environments. I think a lot of people are well aware. I remember when I was playing RuneScape, which is a role-playing game online when I was in 5th grade. I had people come up and say creepy things to me, and that wasn't even close to what you went through. Hopefully it's all right for me to say, I believe that you were in Horizon Worlds, right? That was the platform.
Yeah, Venues is
Horizon Venues. So I do. So clearly you were failed by this platform. I do think that there is an upside to metaverse platforms when it comes to individual safety and privacy that has not been implemented yet. But to zoom out a bit, so I think the metaverse platforms have the potential to code in rules of safety and privacy in a way that you just can't in the physical world. In the physical world, there are laws that prevent us from doing things, but there is no code that prevents you from just walking up to someone and punching them in the face. In metaverse platforms, you can code that kind of thing in. I actually think that since you had your experience, I think Horizon realized that they had really sort of missed the mark on that, and they have since implemented something like collision avoidance, so that if your avatar gets too close to another avatar and you try to move close to them, you will just sort of disappear, at least in their view. And I think, you know, it maybe is a little dystopian to say that code can be law, but it is also a sort of a Web3 credo to say code is law. And that is one of the potential benefits of these platforms, is that we could use code to just make this the kind of situation that you unfortunately went through completely impossible. I don't think any of the platforms are implementing it sufficiently yet. I do think that's some of the promise of metaverse platforms. I also wanted to just, I mean, the fact that you experience this assault in such an immersive way is horrible, but I think it also speaks to another potential advantage. Hopefully it doesn't come across in a weird way. It made me think about someone I know named Morgan Mercer, who owns a company called Vantage Point. And what Vantage Point does is they create virtual reality corporate training modules, like the sort of DEI or sexual harassment trainings that anyone who's worked at a big company has probably gone through in video and multiple choice question form. But the way her experiences work is they hire actors and actually film situations and then put the user in the shoes of someone who is being harassed or assaulted in some way. And it's very effective. I mean, she told me stories of having people take off their headset and start crying, which maybe that's too much, but it's a very, very powerful way to get men, for example, or white people who work with people of color and don't understand microaggressions, to understand what it's like to be someone with that identity in that position. So it's a double-edged sword, and I think right now the edge that's facing us is much sharper, don't get me wrong, but I mean, the fact that you had this experience, it speaks to how immersive these experiences are in general, and maybe there are ways to take advantage of that for good, maybe. I don't think we're there yet, though.
It's interesting that with the training, sort of going back to what Laura was saying about preparing people for the experience. And I think, Laura, one of the first things we talked about was a VR experience at the Whitney that maybe I won't go into here, but it was a very alarming.
I've done that one too.
Where you are in the.
That was my first experience with VRs. Sorry.
It was a lot of people's first experience with VR. It's a piece that was in the Whitney Biennial several years ago, and it's super intense. I mean, I'll find the link. We can look it up. But the problem to me with that experience was, I mean, I didn't think it was whatever. It wasn't my thing, the piece itself. But the bigger problem was that you were in a line of headsets out in public, nowhere to put your stuff, and then put in the headset into a very intense environment that you weren't prepared for in any way. There was no explanation of what you were about to see other than like a tiny plaque, museum style on the wall next to it. And that was incredibly jarring. And while that's not a journalism experience, it's like, how can we make these types of things, better? How can people know what they're going into?
Yeah, and just to give one sentence of detail, it was a sound and visual experience of being beaten, and it was horrible on a street.
And the crazier part is that in the art world, that was for a lot of big museums and a lot of big art folks, the first VR piece they'd ever seen in a museum, and it became this sort of like standard. A lot of people loved that piece and thought it was incredibly powerful, and it just really set things, I think, on a weird course in that space, and was really frustrating.
Let's I could talk to you guys for the next 4 hours, but we only have 20 more minutes. So let's just, but there was a question in the chat actually that aligns with a question that I had prepared to talk to you guys about, and I alluded to briefly, which was about sort of misinformation and persuasion, right? So we've seen how this works in Web 2, and sadly, right, we're living the results of of massive misinformation and disinformation politically in our health in every way. So like, and we're, journalists we have tried so hard to combat this in the IRL world. I'm just curious, based on your experiences operating in this space so far, what does that look like? What does moderation look like? What's the potential there to help get news and information on a better foot in the metaverse? Is that possible that this could be a space where there's verifications in other parts of Web3, right? This is part of it, the authenticity. How could that be better in the metaverse? I would say can it be?
Yeah, I mean, or do you want to go ahead, Nina? I can.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, certainly there's huge opportunities to make it better. It's not the technology that's stopping us. It's unfortunately the system in which technology is developed that prevents us from applying safety by design as a priority. And obviously other things are prioritized, like money, which is a fair way to develop things. But when we're considering society as a whole, and we're considering a world in which, a digital twin of an entire city, or, our own individual digital twins, and that convergence piece, we really do have to take on a wider picture in terms of this is not just another app that we're going to be downloading on our phones. So yeah, there are, in terms of Web3, blockchain technology enabled metaverses could allow us to prioritize accountability over anonymity, and not to say that everyone's going to know your name and your phone number and where you live, but there is on the kind of smart contract blockchain system a way to track people's behavior or actions and activities in the metaverse, and be able to understand what good citizenship looks like within the metaverse. Those applications are certainly possible. And what I like to advocate right now is we have a responsibility right now to plant those seeds right now, and to demand that these systems are built with these priorities today, before it really does unleash a system, a technology that's potentially AI driven in the future, that's advanced too far beyond when we could fix it. And that might be a dystopian view, but really is the kind of the urgency in this technology is going to change our lives. And we cannot deny that. And systems have to be put into place right now in order to use it intentionally to elevate our lives, and not to damage it, because it has so much potential. It has so much potential across healthcare, across industries, across democratizing education, accessibility to all sorts of aspects of the world globally. And if we get it right, this could be a really solid advantage for us as a society across the whole, and working towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's lots of opportunity. We just need to take action now and call it out when it's not working for us.
Yeah, I think from a storytelling perspective, there's a bit of like conventional wisdom, particularly around AR and VR, that news is not going to be the first thing that comes into the metaverse. That this is it's going to be, whether even in the news space, it's going to be feature content, longer form stuff, that these are really, high investment stories that need to be told in that space. And to some extent, I understand that. I understand how long it takes to make a really great VR, AR piece. I've done that. It definitely takes investment and time and people. But I don't know if any of you saw the piece that Taylor Lawrence wrote in the Washington Post last week out the Amber Heard trial and sort of the TikTok coverage of it. And I was like kind of blown away by her piece, because as we don't have to talk about the trial or anything else, my takeaway from this piece was that these TikTokers had pivoted to breaking news because they were really seeing revenue and traffic off of covering, and I use that word quite loosely because I think there's a lot of misinformation and manipulation and terrible stuff happening there. But they were seeing traction from covering breaking news in this different way. And I think rather than being like, okay, this was terrible, which it was, but what can we learn from that kind of like breaking news thing that they were doing and apply it to actual news, and look at that and figure out how to not go that direction, but what is going to work to bring people into news spaces and tell stories in really, reliable ways versus the ways that, some of these folks have chosen to cover it. How can you get that traction in a way that, works for news?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just one more thought on this topic. I don't actually have much more to add besides what you guys said. I think that was spot on. But just to refer back to what I was saying about persistent identity being an important part of the metaverse, at least in my view, I think there's potential for that to help fight misinformation as well. We've all seen the armies upon armies of bots on social media, especially Twitter, that pop up on any news article or underneath any major journalist tweets to spread misinformation. Now, I don't think in the metaverse you will have to always be yourself. I'm not always going to be Alex Lee in the metaverse. I could be a chipmunk wearing a Robin Hood outfit if I wanted, but I will always be a real person. My identity will be persistent, and you'll know that anyone else you interact with in the metaverse is a real person because it is impossible to create a fake identity inside it. Again, very pie in the sky, but if that actually comes true, then that I think is just obviously helpful for limiting the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, and I think that the investment is high as far as like moderation and people that you need to do this. So I don't think that we should be kind of kidding ourselves about just jumping into every platform and what that's going to take. I was listening to Keith from Time talk this morning, and I was just like shocked when he said they had 7 full-time people moderating their Discord. And I was like, I don't know how you replicate that in most newsrooms right now. And I think it's really great that they're able to do that. But, we really need to look at what that cost is going to be and how do you kind of do that at different levels for your organization? Where are the right platforms to get into? When is that going to make sense, for you as an organization or as a journalist? And Alex, you were talking a little bit earlier about, the opportunity for individuals versus organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few really interesting opportunities there. Are we getting too far afield, Hillary, or could we talk about this?
You're talking about journalists, creators in the metaverse. I think you're on point. And
Okay.
also, I will say though, we've got a little bit over 10 minutes left. If you've got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to just keep going here. So go ahead, Alex.
So just to quickly touch on that, Laura, thank you for the setup. It's really Web3 specifically, not necessarily the metaverse, but Web3 technologies are all about community. It's all about giving people access to a token that will help them feel part of a community and also allow them to gain unique benefits from both the community and perhaps the creator at the center of that community. And so there's real potential here. I mean, we've already seen the influencerization of the journalism space. Substack really disrupted journalism a lot. To me, one of the potential promises of Web3 and DAOs and these crypto tokens is to kind of evolve Substacks even further and make it so that your membership in a journalist community is not only something that's beneficial to you, but also has value. And you can sell it to someone else who's interested in consuming that journalist's content. And there are already examples, or sorry, maybe not consuming journalist content, because I don't want to say that the ideal vision for me is a Substack where you need a token to read it. That's obviously bad. But I will give an example of a journalism related DAO that I think is doing something interesting and potentially disruptive. It's actually Dirt, which Daisy, the presenter or the moderator in the previous panel, is one of the founders of that organization. And the whole concept behind Dirt is that it is a DAO, it's a newsletter, anyone can read the newsletter, but holders of the token can actually vote on the editorial content that the newsletter pursues. And it's one of the other co-founders of the DAO is Kyle Chayka, who's the founder of Study Hall, which is a Web2 journalism community. And I mean, when I saw that he was founding a DAO, it didn't surprise me at all, because I've been part of Study Hall, which is, again, a Web2 community for years now, but it's something that I've always sort of paid into, and the only value I've gotten out of it has been the resources of being a community member. Dirt holders have much more of a direct connection and direct control over the content of the newsletter that their organization puts out. I think that's really interesting. I also think there's opportunity for creators to financially benefit whether or not they're part of a DAO. Another example that I just wanted to throw out was Popula.com. It's a publication that started up a few years ago that actually it's a very small operation, sort of treats itself as like a worldwide alt weekly almost. But something I like about it is that they set up wallets that allow you to micro tip any writer using Ethereum at the bottom of their article. You read an article, you like it, there's a button you can press to give a small amount of Ethereum to the writer directly. And now I don't know if that needs the blockchain, but it makes it easier. And I really wish other journalistic outlets had ways for people to directly tip contributors like that, because journalists need it, trust me. So two ways that I think blockchain can actually help journalism is both through micro tipping and creating more revenue streams for journalists, and also allowing journalists to engage with their community in a way that is, I think, more genuine and gives lasting benefit to the community members.
Two things just to follow up on that and sort of go back to the metaverse space, right? Is like thinking about what a journalism community looks like in the metaverse is interesting. It's a little different than the storytelling piece we've talked about. But also, Alex, you've written about retail in the metaverse a little bit. And when I was reading about that, I thought, is there like revenue potential for news and journalism and creators in the metaverse? And I know we're kind of, we might be as news a little bit far off. Laura, to your point, I was also taken aback by 7 full-time staffers at the time minding a Discord channel. And would we all have the resources to invest in innovation that way? So I guess I'm riffing a little bit here, but like, how should we be thinking of, like, what would the first steps be for now? We're talking about planning for the future. This is what Nina's talking about. We need to be taking steps now about what this looks like. Like, is anybody planning well now in news and journalism for the metaverse? Or maybe where should we be looking? What should we be thinking about as we sort of move in that direction? Because we're going to have to. That's what I'm hearing from everybody here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think, we've already seen some attempts by news organizations to use metaverse and Web3 technologies to create new revenue streams. Like the AP has created NFTs out of its photos. I believe the New York Times has auctioned off NFTs of articles. I think that's pretty short-sighted. I don't know who would want to buy the NFT of a New York Times article like 20 or 50 years in the future. So I'd be interested in, I'm sorry, I would be, Laura, I feel like you're the person who should have answered this, so I shouldn't have stomped on you, but I just wanted to point that out because that's like the knee-jerk attempt that we've seen to monetize this space, and I don't think it really makes sense or works.
I mean, I think I've seen the most interesting things happening in the fashion space. When I was at Yahoo/Riot, we worked on a piece, virtual fashion show with Rebecca Minkoff. There's a lot going on, like Gucci just launched something, I think, with Roblox. There's a huge marketing opportunity in that space. I'm kind of like, why do these brands get to have all the fun? Shouldn't like the Vogues of the world be kind of, more editorially, participating in that space? So I think there's a lot of opportunity in those. You can call that news or not, but it is news organization content that I think could really benefit there. It is that like arts, culture, moment space. I think there's a lot of music stuff happening. There were a couple of cool things at Coachella, some really neat activations there. I think some of it's branded content, but I don't think it has to be. And I think there's a lot of, cool potential for really creative projects that, exist in those spaces where you have people who are really excited about the technology in a physical space who then can kind of bring that, with their, brand into that metaverse area.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just checking to see, do we have any other participants? If you've got questions, you've got 5 more minutes to share them with us.
I got really stuck on Alex's piece, or Alex's comment on you could choose to be anybody you want to be in the metaverse. And I just begged a question, you can choose to look and be represented by an avatar by anyone that you want to be, which is slightly different than actually being someone else in the metaverse, because the associated wearables that we will be using and are currently using when we enter a virtual world. So you've got your headset that has the potential to track your eyes, which tells you a lot about who you are and your identity. And then in the combination of all your other biometric feedback that we will potentially be incorporating as we enter into the metaverse, thinking about our wearable watches and any other kind of breath rates, galvanized skin response, are all could be measured when we start entering the metaverse. And Britton Heller has done a piece within human rights within the metaverse. She's a human rights lawyer, that your combination of all your biometric feedback is as identifiable as your fingerprint. And so you, as you enter the metaverse, are always actually you, no matter what you look like. But your biometric feedback is telling the world who you are. And if we put that on a blockchain, then it can track everything that you do and follow you everywhere you go, which has potential to provide safety and security and build frameworks for safety by design and regulation, if that's where we choose to go. And it also, one of the, in my opinion, what went wrong with the internet is that we separated who we are online to who we are in the real world, and we allowed this kind of dissociation to happen. And that's really where we've, I think, gone wrong with concepts like the Proteus effect, where we take on actions of people who we know we're not, but for some reason we enjoy acting like Darth Vader or acting like, whoever it is in Dungeons and Dragons, and acting out, role playing. But when we're going into the metaverse and the concept of acting out your most, dangerous desires, we really have to be careful about with whom, where, and who's in the room when we're doing that. Because, I sound like a broken record, but when we consider the context of being fully bodied and immersed in these digital environments, and currently in the current state, the amount of children who are engaging in these spaces, completely unregulated, then we really have to consider that. And I think, I think as journalists, and I'm not a journalist, I've been on the other side of this. I've now been interviewed by a lot of journalists. And one of my pieces of feedback is like, get in there, experience it, learn it before you start asking me a question about it, where it's very clear to me you don't understand what the experience is, that you don't understand what Web3 is, that you think that it's a game, or that you think that it's an app. Because it's really hard to share my story with someone who just doesn't get it, and I have to justify and I have to validate my reasons for sharing my story.
That makes so much sense. And I think that there's a lot of fear about, high barrier to entry, I think, for people to understand and for journalists to understand what this is, but that is part of our job. And I think the earlier that folks can get in and just start to kind of play around and understand, what you're talking about, the better those stories will be. And I think there's also kind of to kind of riff on what you were saying earlier, like having worked on early web, and, I was on the original Yahoo News team in 2003. And one of the amazing things was that there was like a finite amount of content on the internet. And there was this very utopian kind of view about making this place like what we wanted. You would put a story up and it's like, well, this is so meaningful to me, it must be meaningful to other people. And it kind of was like, you kind of got that immediate feedback in a way that now there's just too much and too many people and too many interests, and there's just no way to contain that on web, in the web that we use now, right? And we have this opportunity to take all the knowledge of all the things we did wrong in the last 20 years and take it into this next phase. And I think it's really smart that we're kind of exploring it with a lot of hesitation. I think that's a good thing. I think we explored the first round with no hesitation at all and just expected everybody to behave appropriately. Mm-hmm. And that is obviously not what happened. And I think it's really good that we have folks who are thinking about these things before we get to that point.
And it's good that we have the hindsight of seeing how how Web 2 went wrong. I mean, the way things are playing out is so different now. During the initial birth of the internet, we had the dot-com bubble, and all these companies cropped up to try to take advantage of the new technology, and most of them failed. And then from then on, companies were sort of chasing after it. But now we see all of these mega corporations like Facebook sort of perceiving this coming over the horizon and preemptively changing their business models in order to try to catch up with it. So, I think that is a good thing overall. But again, I don't necessarily think it's good if meta becomes the building blocks of the metaverse.
You guys were at time. I want to thank you. We had a bunch of questions right at the end, but I apologize to the audience for being so gripped by this conversation that they didn't have questions to share during. But I really want to thank you, Nina, especially I want to thank you as lots have for being so candid and open with us. It's really important, as we all know as journalists, to hear other perspectives, not just people in our own business. So I really am honored to have been able to moderate this conversation with the three of you. So thanks again for making the time. Thanks to everyone who was with us today and to CUNY for giving us the opportunity to talk about this, for Meta, who made it possible, and hope to see you guys all at the next one. Thank you so much. Thanks to all our panelists and participants today too. See you soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
Bye
you.
guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Hillary.
you.